Good evening, everyone. I'm Judy Reese Morse, President and CEO of the Urban League of Louisiana. I am so excited about this evening and so grateful that you are with us to hear our discussion about Local Races Matter, a Louisiana down-ballot forum. There's so much on the ballot this election, from 7 state constitutional amendments to races for U.S. Senate and U.S. House of Representatives to so many important local races. Many decisions must be made. There are Metro Council races in Baton Rouge and Alexandria, a school board race in Orleans Parish, district attorney races in Alexandria, Monroe, Shreveport, and New Orleans, and multiple judicial races in almost every city. It can be a lot to try to keep up with, but all of these amendments and races are exactly what make this election so terribly important. The amendments will impact each of us across the state, and each elected official we see on our ballot will impact decisions made in our cities and in our daily lives. The Urban League of Louisiana is hosting this forum because while presidential elections often have higher turnouts and receive significant attention in the media and on our social media feeds, these local races have a more direct effect on what happens in Louisiana and on the quality of life for our communities. And it's your responsibility to educate yourself, to do the research, to share information, and to go to the polls ready to make informed decisions about the future of our state. And that's exactly why we're going to be focusing tonight on positions, roles, and responsibilities of each elected official on the ballot. Our goal is simply to provide information so that each of you can take what you hear and make your own choices. Our hope is that you will leave this evening with a better understanding of what is on your ballot and what issues are impacted by the different positions that you will be voting for. Armed with that information, we hope you will look at candidates with a better understanding of who you think will do the best job. I want to thank you for, again, being with us this evening, and I want to ask one thing of you. Whatever you take away as valuable and informative, please pass it on to your network. We hope you will share what you learned this evening with others. And to those of you who don't yet have your voting plan together, please pledge to make your plan now. You can get a sample ballot on the Urban League of Louisiana's website. You can request your mail-in ballot if you qualify by October 30th. Starting tomorrow, you can vote early from October 16th to October 27th in person, or of course, you can vote on November 3rd. And please bring everyone you know with you. Finally, if you want to participate in a phone bank operation, we invite you to join the Urban League effort. We have 2 remaining phone bank operations before November 3rd. If you'd like to sign up, please go to urbanleaguela.org/vote. Now, without further ado, I want to welcome our phenomenal moderator, Mr. Jarvis DeBerry, who is the editor of the Louisiana Illuminator. Jarvis, thank you so much for moderating this important conversation, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Judy. Thank you all for having me, and my thanks and appreciation to the Urban League for having this event. As Judy has already said so eloquently, this is an important election for reasons that have absolutely nothing to do with who is going to occupy the White House in January 2021. There are, as she said, ballots and candidates, and not just candidates, but also issues that will directly impact Louisianans across the state on a very intimate level. These are politicians that you might see in the grocery store. These are issues that you might have to deal with immediately without intervention from a U.S. Congress or a Supreme Court, et cetera. And so we found it important that we have this conversation to discuss not just the things that are on the ballot, but also why those things matter as much as they do. And so to join us in this conversation, we have a stellar panel of experts from across the state. And I want to start by introducing them one by one. I will start with former friend, not former friend, but a former colleague,
Yes,
and a
still
dear friend of mine, Stephanie Grace, who is a columnist at the Times-Picayune and the New Orleans Advocate. Stephanie, as you all know, if you follow Louisiana politics at all, is one of our most insightful political columnists in the state. So welcome, Stephanie. Glad
Thank you. Thank you, my friend, I should say.
Thank you, Stephanie. And we also have Oliver Thomas, former city council at large councilman in the city of New Orleans, and now the host of the early morning show in WBOK AM 1230, who has had me on his show plenty of occasions. So welcome, Oliver. Can you hear us?
Good to be here.
Great to have you. We also have Dr. Silas Lee, who is the professor and strategist from Dr. Silas Lee and Associates. You have probably seen him on the news giving his analysis of Louisiana politics. We welcome you, Dr. Lee. Can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
All right.
And we also have joining us Ed Pratt, who is a columnist for the Advocate in Baton Rouge, a longtime political columnist. Welcome, Ed.
Nice to be here. Thank y'all for having me.
And just joining us is Ashley Shelton, who is executive director of the Power Coalition for Equity and Justice. Ashley, can you hear us?
I can. Thank you, Jarvis. Glad to be here today.
Well, thank all of you all for joining us. This is an important conversation. We have lots of ground to cover, and we want to do it as quickly as possible. Dr. Lee, we understand that you may have to leave us a bit earlier than the rest of the people on this panel. So I first wanted to start with you and to give just kind of the broadest kind of overview of the things that are on the ballot for most Louisianians this election. And we've often complained about the length of Louisiana ballots. How does this compare to those lengths of ballots that we've seen in the past?
Well, it's long, but not that long. Depends on what time frame you're looking at. Certainly, you have quite a few amendments on there. And as we know with constitutional amendments, voters are not very informed or aware of those amendments unless it is something very controversial or something that will mobilize people to be for or against them. However, what we know with amendments is that it's always, I would say, the hidden elements of amendments, what's in there, but we may not be informed about. And when I say we may not be informed about, that means as in all politics and anything that relates to political, economic, and social policies, you have winners and losers. You also have people who will be impacted either positively or negatively, or in some way they will have to pay. So we have to be very strategic in terms of using our vote effectively, especially when it comes to amendments and those down ballot races. Quite often you hear voters say they skip a race, and that's something we should not do, because for every race that is skipped, that means you are allowing some other person to determine the outcome and either vote against your interests, or in some way you might not be affected in the way that you anticipated or wanted. So I know for a fact that in reference to what we see on the ballot, part of it is what I call the visible aspects of politics. That's where you have candidates running. Then you always have the hidden hand, and that's where you have the amendments, what's written, what people may not be informed about. Also, it relates to the fact that with amendments and other issues, pieces of legislation, where you don't have the mobilization, the organization behind an amendment or an issue that you would have with a candidate, that is open season for either defeating or passing something that can be in our interest or against our interest. So this is where it becomes critically important for us to become informed, to inform ourselves, or for organizations such as what the Urban League is doing an excellent job at informing the electorate about how we will benefit, how we will be affected, what it will cost, how long a policy or an amendment will be in place, and what we should be aware of. Because people often wake up the next morning and they will always say, I didn't know I had to vote on that. I'm surprised that passed. Or when did this law happen? Well, it happened 5 years ago. You just were not informed. So we have to utilize all of the multiple methods in terms of communication, as social media, traditional media, all the ways that we communicate with each other, especially through media and through conversation. So with Oliver's show and other vehicles of informing and motivating voters and citizens, they become all part of the toolbox of democracy. It's no longer one-dimensional. It's no longer isolated and concentrated to a particular group. It's very dispersed, and more people see themselves as active participants, but they need to be directed and led quite often and informed. When I say informed, it's not a one-time show, it's not a one-time event. They have to constantly be informed, motivated, and directed, because people are distracted with just basic survival issues.
Yes, for sure. Stephanie, Dr. Lee mentioned that, turnout is low, or participation in voting for the amendments is low unless there's something controversial or people are been motivated to turn out. We have at least one such amendment in that list this year, but it seems to be like a mix between a super controversial amendment and those that may just befuddle voters who step into the ballot box. Can you give just the quickest of overviews about those amendments?
Sure. I assume you're talking about number one.
I am.
Okay. Well, what normally happens is a lot of the issues that come up in constitutional amendments tend to be kind of technical, managerial, or they have to do with how money is handled, how the budget is handled. Often it's something that, Dr. Lee talked about things that kind of don't affect most people, but these things affect some people very much. So people, there is a group out there that really wants it, whatever it is. And it's really worth trying to understand who that group is. And if that's a group where, you share their values and interests or not. Number one, I'll say, it actually was postponed from last year. It was supposed to be on the ballot, the gubernatorial ballot. And it's an anti-abortion question. It's a little confusing because it basically says that there should be nothing, a yes vote says that there should be nothing in the state constitution that suggests that the Constitution supports legalized abortion. So it doesn't really do anything particular, but it's there kind of as a statement of principle and as almost kind of a, the anti-abortion movement is trying to kind of cover its bases, and because things really are in flux on this issue, and are they in flux now with what's happening in the Supreme Court. And so Louisiana, as I think most people know, is actually the most anti-abortion state, according to polls. This is an issue that around the country you see Democrats and Republicans really fighting over. Here, less so. Here, there's a segment of the Democratic Party that's very much in favor of abortion rights, but there's a big segment of the Democratic Party that's not. And in fact, this was authored by a legislator named Katrina Jackson, who's a Democrat, who has been head of the Black Caucus, but is a very outspoken opponent of abortion. In fact, the feeling is generally that it was moved from last year to this year to kind of help John Bell Edwards out because, he's anti-abortion and there were a lot of people who were angry at him in his base, and, to kind of not have it be that big of an issue at the same time. So here it is, it's a very big issue. Louisiana already has something called a trigger law on the books, which means that if Roe versus Wade is overturned by the Supreme Court, which obviously could happen, there is a law that says abortion is illegal in Louisiana in that case, in every case except for the life of the woman. And that was signed by Kathleen Blanco. That was signed by a Democrat. And so, you know, does this do anything beyond that? Technically, no. Could it come up in a court setting if, you know, you'll remember Roe versus Wade was, you know, the Supreme Court found that the right to privacy, it's real,
right.
such exactly,
Yes.
which isn't delineated by words in the Constitution, but they found it embedded in some other concepts. It's kind of meant to be a defense against that.
Yes.
Something like that happening at the court level in the state, it's probably unlikely that would happen. So it's really kind of a statement of principle. And, you know, you're starting to hear stories from women who, you know, have had miscarriages and needed, you know, I mean, like a lot of the personal stories are starting to come out of the different circumstances in which people seek abortions, which is not always the stereotypical one. And it's just a very emotional issue, obviously, but it's not the usual type of issue we deal with in these settings.
So there are six more.
Which are, yes.
To that, plus a proposition that should be on everybody's ballot, correct?
Right. So do you want me to run through all of them? Or?
Just very quickly.
Okay.
And then I have a question for Oliver.
Sure. Okay. Number 2, oil and gas well. This is an interesting one because it basically says oil and gas wells can be assessed in a way that is unique to what they do, their productivity as opposed to their economic value. And what's interesting, like I said before, it's important to know who's for and against something. In this case, this is a deal that was worked out with industry and the assessors, and they've been working on it for a long time. So that I think it's interesting to look at when you have something like that, when you have different parties coming together, that gives you a sign that maybe this was an issue that was, you know, maybe they've come to a consensus on it, and maybe that's a sign that it's not as controversial. I mean, I think another factor to look at to determine that is, how did the legislature vote to put it on the ballot in the first place? Was it a split party vote? Did the Democrats vote for one thing and the Republicans another, or was it unanimous? Number 7 is one that was unanimous, and that's an interesting one. I'm skipping ahead, but this is that the right one? That's the unclaimed property. Yes. So this started off as kind of a political dispute between the Republican state treasurer, John Schroeder, the Democratic governor, John Bell Edwards, over whether money that's kind of in the unclaimed fund but is not claimed, can go into the general fund or should be held back. And they went to court over it. I mean, it was a big political dispute. But what happened here is that they kind of came to an agreement on the specifics. And if you look at the legislative vote, I believe it was unanimous or almost unanimous. So again, that gives you a sense that this was a compromise and this might not be, that much of a hot button issue.
Sure.
Number 3.
No, I would say number 5 has seemed to
5 is the hot button. Yes.
Animate people from across the state.
Correct. And that one is, it's very business friendly. It is, it basically would give localities options to delay taxes that companies building facilities can pay. And it is seen as something that would potentially help companies really avoid a big tax bill. And
correct.
We have a lot of that already in this state, let's just say.
Yes.
So,
actually, instead of having you to go through all of them at once, I'm going to bring in Oliver and then Ashley. Oliver, I would suspect that you probably hear directly from the public a lot more than anybody else on this panel. And so to Dr. Lee's point about people being confused or not knowing what these amendments are and what they do, what are you hearing from people about? Are you hearing anything at all about these amendments? Are you hearing confusion? Are you hearing clarity? What is the general scuttlebutt? What's the general response out there?
Consistently, we're hearing no. And of course, Robert Scott from PAR is one of my guests every year or every time there's an election, there are proposition amendments. Bob comes on to explain them. We had a very healthy debate for about an hour yesterday, And of course, I have a co-host now, the professor who's one of my guests, who's a self-renowned conspiracy theorist, along with being a modern day philosopher who's suspicious of anything that government puts on the ballot at the last minute that either asks for money, defers money, or in a way you can't understand it, says it's going to give you more money. And so most of the people over the last several years, especially with issues that they can't quite understand, have been against them. It's very confusing. Even PAR and the people who actually rate these things say that the state has to come up with a better way of educating the public before ballot initiatives come before us, as well as doing something different with the language. Now, in the last couple of days, what I've heard is it's interesting how people are feeling out there. Even if it's something that's good for the people, it's a conspiracy because they don't want to create a language where folk can vote for it because they want to keep the status quo anyway. And people actually believe that, and they're actually saying that. But the biggest challenge over the last couple of years is, how do you begin to, like Dr. Lee said, how do you begin to educate the public before these ballot initiatives get before us? And how do you create, do some wordsmithing, or you know, like the great Ed Pratt? How do you create a language that any and everybody can understand? So suspicion across the board, even for stuff that people think may help them, they're inclined to say no.
Gotcha. Speaking of educating people here, go ahead. Go ahead.
What he said about people being concerned and maybe mostly turned off by the amendments. I deal in a strange circle of people, probably not people that a lot of you deal with.
Are they people in the media?
Because of where I grew up. Not many of them. A lot of people, I mean, these are down to earth people. I'm a neighborhood guy, all right? And there's some other folk, their basic comment is when they see those amendments, I'm just not gonna vote for any of them. They don't want to take the time to educate themselves about it. And some of those people I know, educated people, school teachers, blah, 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 and all of that. And they just said, look, I don't get it. I'm worried about this. I might hurt myself by voting for this. And they just say, either I'm not going to vote at all on this, or I'm just going to vote against it. No. And that's the thing there has to be a better way of educating the public on what these amendments are. I agree with Oliver wholeheartedly. There's got to be a better way to do this because there are too many people like these people that I run into that says, I'm just not going to vote on them, or I'm just going to vote against it, automatic.
Well, I was going to say that there is somebody on our panel who's responsible for helping educate people, and that's Ashley Shelton. And so I wanted to ask Ashley, number one, if she could talk about how they've been educating voters across Louisiana on these particular amendments. And could you pick up the ones that Stephanie did not cover, what those amendments will do? I think we covered 1, 5, and 7. So we have 2, 3, 4, and 6. Okay.
2 is the oil and gas well. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. 1, 2, 5, and 7. So we have 3, 6, 3, 4, and 6.
4, 6. Yes.
No, for sure. I mean, I think, look, this is the ballot that we're putting on folks' doors. And to Dr. Lee's point, I mean, this is the first year we had to do a fold.
Wow.
One door hanger, but we had to do 2 this year. And it has every elected officer. It has all of the offices that are on there. Where we could on this document fit in, what are the roles and responsibilities? Because that's another thing that deters voters, is that walking into the ballot booth unprepared or not being clear what's going to be on there. And then also too feeling overwhelmed about well, what does this judge do? And what is this, what does the Supreme Court do? And what are all of these different, folks have power over? And so, and so we've been trying to create, several different explainers, door knockers, working with our partner Voice of the Experienced, to make sure that we're educating folks and getting the word out. And the constitutional amendments are on there. And even though we are nonpartisan 501c3 organization, we can take a stand on issues. And so, interestingly enough, I mean, I think for us, certainly 4, 5, and 7 kind of stood out for us as things that we wanted the community to understand why we, from an economic opportunity perspective, said vote no on those. But 3, it's about budget stable. This is about, do you support an amendment? And I also want to preface this by saying too that one of the things that's also most frustrating about these amendments is folks not understanding. So if I vote yes, am I voting no? And if I vote no, am I voting yes? Like what exactly am I voting on? And so I think that we've tried to take these amendments and put them into plain language. PAR also has a really good guide that actually, the Public Affairs Research
Let me hold
Council.
this up. This is, I don't know if you can see it, but they have a 1-pager and there's if you vote yes, it means this. If you vote no, it means this for each question on PAR. So that's really helpful.
Yes, and so they actually break that down so that you can kind of see it. And so on Amendment 3, it's like, do you support an amendment to allow the Budget Stabilization Fund, aka the Rainy Day Fund, to be used for state costs associated with federally declared disasters? And I think that, this comes at an interesting time as we are kind of in the aftermath of Laura and Delta. Laura also being a storm that nobody really paid attention to, but decimated Lake Charles and the communities surrounding it. And so here we are, having voters having to discuss and think about these, about these kinds of things, but also too, from a fiscal fairness perspective for us, trying to also balance the interest of government with the, with how and in what ways, they prioritize other things in the budget, but then want to go to the Rainy Day Fund to do what work that they may need to do for people in community and the people they serve. And so that's Amendment 3. 6 and 7. Certainly, homestead exemption is also a hot issue in our state, and folks feel very passionately about it. And so what Amendment 6 does, increases the threshold to qualify for homestead exemption for residential properties, and certain, seniors, certain military and disabled persons from 50,000 to 100,000 per year, beginning in 2026. And so again, this is a very hot issue all around our state around homestead exemption and who can claim this tax benefit. And then certainly the last one on unclaimed property, and this, kind of permanent, trust fund. And Stephanie, did you do 7 and I'm redoing it on the permanent trust fund?
Yeah, she did 7. I think we're missing 4.
Oh, sorry. Okay,
I'm sorry. I don't know that I really described the substance of 7 very well. So I think it would be helpful to run through that.
Sure. So 7 was, do you support an amendment to create the Louisiana Unclaimed Property Permanent Trust Fund to allow the state Treasury Department to keep the money that remains unclaimed by its owners, instead of sending unclaimed money to the state general fund? And I think, as Stephanie said, and started to kind of explore, also, it seems like there's this larger state conversation where they have come to some agreement about some things, but I think also to Dr. Lee's point, like some of these things also feel like, folks are just like, why, let's just vote no, because why mess with it, right? Like we don't know, what that means. And I think also too, again, like for, ourselves, certainly our partners at the Louisiana Budget Project who do a lot of fiscal fairness work, like also, are always trying to balance things that go in our budget that should be delineated for taxpayers and relief and the issues that affect and impact taxpayers versus like an easy out for other things, right? That they don't want to prioritize through the state budgeting process. But again, that's 7. And then I think we've got 4, I think is the last one, Jarvis?
I think that's right.
Yep. Do you support an amendment that would artificially limit the growth of the state general fund? And again, I think for us, one of the things that we've struggled with is like, I mean, I'm me, and I was just like, what does that mean? And so trying to expound and help the general public, like kind of connect with these things. And so I see that there's a question. I mean, so we do have a constitutional amendment explained on our website at powercoalition.org. I would tell you that, the PAR guide actually, we just tried to put it in layman's terms. But the PAR guide, which is Public Affairs Research Council, they actually do, if you vote yes, this is what it means. And if you vote no, this is what it means for each constitutional amendment. And so I do, and I want to say their website is let's see, let me get that.
parlouisiana.org.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Sure.
But I do think one thing I will say, Jarvis, just in closing, here are the things that we know are important. These ballots are super expensive, and especially since we had to do a double fold door hanger this year, we can't have organizing conversations on the doors because of COVID-19, but these door hangers serve as a way for us to still relay information to folks in the safest way possible. And we know that when people have access to a sample ballot, that you increase the likelihood that they will go vote and participate by almost 30%. And so that's why we always print these. Because the other thing that happens too is that, people think that these campaigns are reaching out to everyone in our communities. And what the Power Coalition knows and has found is that, no one's talking to infrequent voters of color. Nobody's talking to, if you're not a chronic voter, usually either the campaigns don't have money to talk to them. And if the campaign does have money, they don't prioritize their voices. And so for us at the Power Coalition and our partners, it's been really critical for us to be able to, we made 1.3 million contacts in the statewide elections last year. We're probably going to try to push close to 2 million contacts. We've got a universe of about 750,000 folks across the state that we're targeting so that we can have unprecedented turnout in communities of color across the state, because we know that if we talk to our folks, that at a minimum, 60% of the folks that we target in our universe will turn out to vote. And so that touch, that conversation, the information makes such a critical difference in people actually taking that next step to turn up at the polls and vote.
An interesting thing, Jarvis, about these amendments, and as part of the conversation we've had on the Good Morning Show, is that in the past, they could take people of color, Black folk, a minority community for granted. That government could put stuff that it wanted to benefit government or the status quo, and you automatically get Black folk and poor folk to vote for it. Well, that's with the suspicion in government and the distance between the political entity and poor people or working people right now, you can't take them for granted anymore. You can't just put an initiative on the ballot and think you're going to get that 15 to 25% of the people who are just for whatever some politician or what organization tells them to be for. So that's an interesting dynamic, the way it's changing right now.
Thank you, Oliver, for that. Before we go further, I want to say that everyone can go get their own sample ballot by going to the Secretary of State's website. And I think that's, there are a couple of different ways to get there. I think one is sos.la.gov, but there's also Go Vote, GEAUX Vote. I think that's .com that you all can go to, and you'll be able to put in your specific address and it will show you the ballot that is specific for you and your household and in your area. That being said, there are some issues on the ballot, some offices, I should say, on the ballot that are going to be common to everybody. And I wanted Dr. Silas Lee to talk about that briefly. What are those things that are going to be on everybody's ballot? We've covered the constitutional amendments, of course, but we also have senator, and we also have a proposition that's in on every voter's ballot. Are you still there, Dr. Lee?
Dr. Lee?
Okay. And every body in Louisiana will also get to vote for Congress.
Yes.
So if you are, no matter where you are, we have 6 congressional districts in Louisiana, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And you will be able to go to your, as I said before, go to the Secretary of State's website, and it will show you exactly everything that's on your ballot, including the congressional district that you live in and who's on the ballot there. We have 1 open congressional seat in Louisiana. That's Congressional District 5, which includes a big old chunk of the state. I know that's not the necessarily most professional way of saying that, but it is a huge chunk of Louisiana that makes up Congressional District 5. At this point, that is represented by Dr. Ralph Abraham. He is not seeking re-election, so that is the only open seat that's going to be on your ballot. Every other congressional district, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6, all have incumbents running. So you should be familiar with the incumbents, and you may or may not be familiar with your challengers, but you can always check out that information at the Secretary of State's website. So what are some of the other big issues that are on the ballot? We have, I went to the Secretary of State's website just yesterday, and it gave me, I think, every single person on the ballot across Louisiana, and it's a huge whopping file. No one individual voter is going to get all of those, obviously. But we have a lot of issues there. We have Supreme Court justices in some cases. We have district attorneys in some places, as Judy mentioned at the very beginning. We have school board races in some places. We have judges of different levels. So what we thought that we would do is try to translate issues into offices on the ballot. And so when we are talking about local races matter, what we wanted to have this conversation be in the main is a discussion about why they matter. So for example, there are Supreme Court justices on the ballot in November's election, and perhaps even in December's elections as well. I will start with Dr. Lee. Why is it important who is on the Supreme Court in Louisiana? If you're trying to convince someone that this is an important election for them, an important office for them to pay attention to, what do you tell them to convince them?
Well, even though the majority of people will never have any need to go before the Supreme Court, decisions rendered by the court will impact us in some way, directly or indirectly. And that is one of the major fallacies about the court system. 98% of people will never have any contact with the courts, but we will be impacted by the decisions. And out of those decisions come policies. And those policies will either limit our freedom, expand it, or in some way impose restrictions or other requirements that we do not want, or we may want, but we do not have the apparatus to stop it. So courts serve a major role. And what we find with courts is that judges, people in the court system, they are either advocates for justice, or they become major oppressors in terms of implementing forms of oppression and restriction. And that is something we have to be aware of with the court system. It's an indirect way of rewarding or punishing people that may not have direct contact. And by indirect, that means our rights are either curtailed or expanded. And since we do not have any contact with the court system in many ways, we may not know how we are going to benefit or be penalized until an event occurs that directly impacts us. And that is in relation not just in crime, but civil issues, economic issues. Look, we have an issue right now in Jefferson Parish with the young boy, the young student, in reference to the BB gun. There's 2 cases now. And here again, that's something that the courts may be involved in. So courts play a major role in impacting our lives directly and indirectly, just that we don't realize it sometimes until it's too late. And that's the best way to explain to people that we are on the sidelines of justice, but in many ways, we have to become more active participants, because we tend to look at it as an observer and not as what we should do to become involved to protect the interests, not only of us, but for those who cannot protect their interests or fight for their interests. and may not be aware. So we really have to become more activists in terms of being observant about what is happening in the courts, and not only what's happening, who is running. Because the courts also become a stepping stone, a training ground for future, not just jurists, but elected officials. Many of our other elected officials, they started in the court system.
Stephanie, the Supreme Court, their decisions may not be prolific. I mean, they may not have a decision every day or every month, but they seem to often be quite controversial. I'm thinking of a recent decision to keep a man in prison for 25 years for stealing a pair of hedge clippers. That man was released today.
Yes.
I'm hearing, but those are the kinds of decisions that Supreme Court justices tend to make.
Right. I mean, I think you have to divide it into, as Silas mentioned, civil and criminal, because the Supreme Court has jurisdiction over everything. And again, like the US Supreme Court, they tend to get the big cases because people appeal. They start at the district level, then there's an appeals court level, and then if they're still fighting it out or if something really important is at stake, it goes to the Supreme Court. I would say a few things. One is that for those in the New Orleans area who are in District 7, there's an open seat there. The terms are staggered. The seats are, so not every seat is up. So there are 2 seats up on this ballot. One is District 4, which is kind of the very rural northeast part of the state. District 7 is based in New Orleans. It's to replace Burnett Johnson, who is the Chief Justice, and she has reached the mandatory retirement age, so she's not running for re-election. And there are 3 judges, sitting judges, who are competing, 2 on the appeals court, 1 in a district court. One thing to pay attention to, we're talking a lot about representation in this election cycle. The candidates are 3 Black women. Everybody else in the court is a white man. So there's, whoever it is going to bring an important perspective that will not be represented elsewhere. You saw that with Burnett Johnson, who penned a very strong dissent in the case Jarvis was just talking about, the man who was, convicted under what's called the habitual offender law, that after 3 strikes, you can get a really tough sentence, even if the individual crime is pretty minor. And that's a really controversial thing. It's being talked about a lot in the Orleans district attorney race, for example, and in some of the judge races. So you're going to kind of get these criminal justice issues, these big criminal justice issues, which are really just kind of in play right now in a lot of places. On the civil side, you get, this is the court that decides whether legislation passed in Baton Rouge is constitutional, according to the Louisiana Constitution, that thing that we keep amending. That's the document, and it's not like the US Constitution in that it's not short, it doesn't outline these broad principles. It has a lot of these, technicalities that are with the kind of language that's in these amendments. Yeah. But the Supreme Court is the ultimate arbiter of whether things are past constitutional muster. You have a lot of fights between trial lawyers and business, kind of plaintiffs, people who sue and people who are sued. That is a very big divide in Louisiana. And that's where a lot of the money comes from. That's where a lot of the energy in these races comes from. Less so in that 7th district race than I was just talking about, because I think there isn't a field where some are on one side and some are on the other side. So these big players in these fights in other districts are not really contributing a lot of money in this district. So, but these are the kinds of cases, regulation, environmental regulation, things like that. Yeah. What rights should people who sue, people who feel they were wronged, have, versus what rights people who are being sued should have?
Sure.
Really important.
I wanted to go to the opposite end of the judicial scale and with a question to Oliver and talk about the magistrate court judge races, which are going to be on some Louisianians' ballots in November. People may number one, not know what a magistrate judge is or what a magistrate judge does. Can you talk about the importance of that position? Why should we care who the magistrate judge is? I don't even know who the magistrate is.
Well, the magistrate court is going to help set the docket, set the caseload to be distributed through the different criminal court judges. It's the first place you're going to stop to see whether justice can be achieved. It's the first stage where the prosecutor and the defense or that individual and that family is going to see their track or the start of their process through the system. You asked the principal question that I think, for Judy, Reese, and the Urban League, why this is important. Your question about what do we tell people, and I think we all need to be mindful of that. I tell people this election is about the knee on the neck, or whether justice can breathe for you and your family. This is an election about justice. And I think if we start there, people will begin to understand why down-ballot voting is important. Because in many cases, it's bigger than these candidates. You would hope that their resumes would line up with justice, would line up with folks' ability to breathe, and would line up with fairness. But the magistrate is extremely important. So, I try to let people know, look, there are different steps in the process. And in the process in criminal court, you're going to go see that magistrate first. And you need a magistrate that understands the case. First of all, that's going to be there. That's going to understand in dealing with whatever the prosecution or the police or whatever information has been gathered to bring you to that magistrate court. And then it's going to be allotted to criminal court. But the bigger thing here, guys, for me, about these judicial races is, right now, I think we're on notice in terms of the quality of the judiciary. For years, there's been a question in Louisiana about appointed versus elected. So we have some really, really qualified people running for these offices that are not part of the status quo. They're not being brokered by the political system, but they're people who've offered their time and their talent to serve in the judiciary. So it's going to say a lot about the public right now, because some of the people who are the most qualified people who are running against the system, are running against the power brokers, and they're running against the status quo. I mean, how many folk have we had questions? They just met the requirements to run for judge. So the political brokers and the political godmothers and godfathers, because they have relationships, have offered them up to be a judge. Well, in any other place, especially when you're worried about the quality of the judiciary, you wouldn't take that kind of chance with justice. So, yeah, I mean, but for the magistrate is extremely important. But all these races are important, especially with this move for justice right now and to improve the quality of the judiciary.
Can I add one thing to that? I think one of the specific ways magistrates are important is they set bond. And we're having this big debate right now over cash bail. Should people who are accused but not convicted, be subject to cash bail when that might land them in jail, and it might, the downward spiral. I'm sorry?
Stay here or go home.
Yeah. And this is kind of the court where that is determined. So again, that's one of the really specific things to look at. And it's part of, sorry.
And to Stephanie's point, there's been a really big fight over that. And there are a lot of, constitutional questions about this. Was this the way the system was designed, or is this the way the system has just become, where we just have a tradition now of locking up people who are accused and charging them money? That's not really the way the system was designed to work, but that's the way that we've been for quite some while now.
And really an understanding when people get locked up of how it can send them into a downward spiral, how they could lose jobs and homes and custody of their kids and all of these things, when again, you think about it, they haven't been convicted, they're accused.
Yes.
I was going to make a point before
Go ahead.
I get off.
Yes, please.
With the judicial system, you don't wait until your house is on fire to buy insurance.
Mm-hmm.
And in this particular case, especially with the judicial system, quite often people feel that they will not have any need for the system. It's just that you never know when you're going to have a need for the system, directly or indirectly, in terms of either on the civil side or the criminal side. And this is where we really need to start to pay attention to the quality, the philosophy, the past decisions of candidates running for these various judicial offices.
Mhm.
Because there are two things that are very important. One, they hold these positions for a long time. Two, they influence policy, public policy in particular, and public discourse. And we may not see and hear from them all the time, but they are in the background orchestrating decisions. Because of their position. They have access that many people may not realize. Because when you think of a judge, I bet if you put all the Supreme Court justices on Canal Street, no one would recognize them.
Right.
But they are the
I'm not
most
sure I would.
powerful people that you can imagine. Simply because you may not recognize them doesn't mean they do not have power and influence. And that's one of the critical aspects about any type of power. The people with power don't walk around broadcasting it. They very quietly disperse it and use it and implement it in either to protect their interests or oppose our interests. And that is why I think we really have to start to pay closer attention in terms of screening, evaluating, and not just look at these candidates running for judges from a popularity perspective.
But Dr. Lee, I think this is, a judge is going to begin to use their power. Whenever I talk about criminal justice, I usually start with a joke that when they say all rise, it used to be for the judge. Now it's for the prosecutor. Too often you hear judges say what they can't do, especially when it talks about justice for some of the poorest people. And in many cases, with cases where they shouldn't even be before them. So our judges.
And that's an important point, because a lot of justices or judges may just think their role is limited to strictly that courtroom. Bingo. And their role is not limited, is very expansive, beyond the courtroom, very influential. It's not just something that can be pigeonholed into criminal law or civil law, or just a particular arena.
Right. Although we should point out that in Orleans specifically, you do have judges that are specifically criminal and specifically civil, unlike the rest of the state. Yes.
Judges all over the place.
Which again makes this confusing. I mean, I think one of the things that, like you're saying, it makes it so hard for people to figure out who to vote for is most people, as you said, don't have personal experience. They don't go to court all the time. They don't get sued, or they don't sue somebody, or they're not arrested, or they're not crime victims. So, the compare that to city council or something where there are meetings that are on TV and you can check and see how they voted on different issues. It's just much more challenging for voters. It's really tough.
I don't know if I agree with that, Stephanie, because we're the incarcerated place per capita in the world.
That's true. Yeah.
And in New Orleans, most of us who grew up where I grew up and come from where I come from, you've had a family member that's been through the system, almost like it was a rite of passage. Right. So, but I think you bring up something important, and why what we're doing here is important, because there needs to be a level, a way of educating and telling those stories about those encounters that the people close to you had with the system.
Right.
Because here in New Orleans, everybody either been to or got somebody who been to.
Sure, yeah. But have you been to every courtroom? Can you evaluate every judge? And have you been to civil? Yeah, it's just because the number, it's a long list. So yes, I agree with you. And it's,
And I just wanted to add to the discussion about the magistrate. Many, many years ago, I think it was 2007, somewhere around there, I had the idea of writing about the low conviction rate in criminal juries in Orleans Parish. And I asked the criminal district judge about that. And I was admittedly approaching the low conviction rate as a problem, that this was obviously something wrong. Maybe something was wrong with the jurors. Maybe the jurors weren't taking crime seriously enough. And this particular judge, I won't name him, but this particular judge told me, well, half of the people who get arrested in New Orleans never should have been. And that is a position and a point that goes directly back to the magistrate judge. If they should not have been arrested, then the magistrate at the very beginning should have said there's no probable cause for this arrest and you are free to go. But the implication that people were coming to criminal court and being tried when they should not have been arrested is a direct finger point at not only the police, which it also is, but it's also a finger point at the magistrate judge, because if there was no probable cause for them to be arrested, and that magistrate judge should have said that immediately, and the case should have been over at that point.
That's why I said that magistrate judge feeds the system. That's the start of the process. So you definitely need a quality magistrate judge. Good point, John.
We have a question. One person watching us thinks we gave a little short shrift to Amendment 3. So we want to visit that one more time. I'm going to read it and let the panelists discuss it. Amendment 3, do you support an amendment to allow for the use of the Budget Stabilization Fund, also known as the Rainy Day Fund, for state costs associated with a disaster declared by the federal government? I know Ashley touched on this a little bit earlier, but people are wondering what a yes vote actually means. Anybody?
I mean, a yes vote actually means that, you know, in many cases, the stabilization fund, like the city fund balance, is used in case of shortfalls. If you have to fill it in some areas in the budget. Now, I'm not sure how I want to vote for this, because does it let the federal government off the hook if the state plugs holes in the disaster by using the stabilization fund? Is there the ability to renegotiate with FEMA to get reimbursement or to fill that budget again? And you know, we have not done a very good job with having that rainy day money or that extra money if there's a gap in critical areas. And look at the infrastructure budget. Look at the questions around education. You know, look and with our nursing homes, with our elderly, in many cases our charity, our medical system. So I'm giving this one some more thought. So what happens if you take that money, put it into to cover a disaster, does that money come back at some point, especially if it's needed to plug critical holes or shortfalls in critical areas?
Stephanie, what
and
is
maybe
the...
think of it
Go
as
ahead.
a line of credit that you will have at your disposal in times of need. You don't want to wait till you need some money, some funds, then have to go and find them, rather than have that money sitting there that could be and would be available in a critical time. Especially, you just never know what's going to happen in today's society in reference to requiring greater need and greater services from government.
Right, and in a timely manner in the case of a disaster when you don't know when you're going to be reimbursed by FEMA, for example, or if, as Oliver said. I mean, my understanding of this is that it is designed to give the state government more flexibility in situations like that. And that, you know, I think that there are very good arguments for that probably.
But more flexibility to do what?
Well, to, again, respond to disasters. So you can, that's all kinds of things that could be good or bad. Like, I mean, I understand that could be corrupted, yes.
We had people on my show who were concerned about the emergency contracts that went out initially.
There is that, yes.
You know, we dealt with that during Hurricane Katrina with the 100 million no bid contracts. So it's easy to say critical need, but critical need for who?
Yeah.
For
that's fair.
Or for contractors.
I see Ashley about to speak.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I mean, and you know, and I think too, it also goes back to, I mean, do you know that, I mean, right now we're trying to get Congress to release Katrina funds. We still have like $36 million in, you know, like sitting in the road home fund that has not been touched or utilized because of the way it's regulated. But our congressional delegation is in Congress right now, and they could easily, you know, because they always say it takes an act of Congress. Well, they're there. Let's do an act of Congress for the people of Louisiana. And so I think, you know, I think there's and that happens in lots of disasters depending on how the declaration comes down. And so I think that, again, there could be lots of reasons, you know, I'm with Oliver, like there could be lots of reasons why this is, you know, like this is, I can certainly understand the case, right? But also at a time when our legislature's in special session, trying to strip the governor of his power under emergence, I don't even know who are the people of Louisiana supposed to go to when a disaster is declared, and who's in charge? You know, like, I just feel like people don't understand the layers of government, and then all of the resources. I mean, again, there's housing monies from many disasters that still exist that we are trying to reappropriate to
road money, yeah.
Yeah, the eviction crisis that we're currently facing because of COVID and the pandemic in general. I mean, and so I just say that, like, I think that we create this opening, but then we don't know how it actually gets used. And again, when we talk about fiscal fairness, this state budget has every loophole in the world for businesses, but when are we going to center people and do what's right by the people of this state and not create more entry points where money is leaking from places that doesn't actually support the people of this state and its taxpayers? And so I'm with Oliver. Like, I get it. I understand. I've done Katrina, Rita, Gustav, Ike, and the BP oil spill, and Laura. And so at the end of the day, like, I've done disaster recovery philanthropy for a really long time. And I can just tell you that my greatest frustration is trying to get federal and state dollars to the ground. It is not that there is not enough federal or state money to be enacted to recover folks. It's helping to cut through the tape so that actual people can rebuild their houses and their communities and their businesses.
On the surface, it sounds good, Stephanie. Budget stabilization in case of a disaster. Okay, well, Bobby Jindal said send disaster funds to the Superdome.
Yeah.
The federal court ruled that it was discriminatory in how the FEMA funds were passed out, but there was no remedy. People are still challenged to get money that was supposed to be for our recovery. I was part of negotiating that 21 cents on a 21 or 64 cents on a dollar for stuff that wouldn't be built for 5, 10, or 15 years later. So it sounds good on the surface, but what protects, are the citizens going to be first in terms of that state stabilization fund for disasters, or will government facilities and business interests be first? That's not defined.
That's always the question, yeah.
So let us next go, and I realize we didn't talk about some of these in depth. Perhaps the most confusing amendment as written is Amendment 4. Do you support an amendment to limit the growth of the expenditure limit for the state general fund and dedicated funds, and to remove the calculation of its growth factor from the Constitution? I've been to college. I have no idea the question I just read. Does anybody want to jump in on what that means and how people should be expected to understand that? Not how to vote, but what does it mean?
Right. It's part of a kind of a general movement. You know, there are these Republicans in the legislature. You know, the legislature is now majority Republican. We have a Democratic governor. So there have been a lot of partisan fights over things like spending money. And this is kind of an outgrowth of one of them, that, you know, the idea is it's aimed at slowing the growth of government, which is something that this Republican group wants to do. And, you know, kind of the other side of that is, you know, flexibility, you can invest more. If you have good years, you can invest in roads, things like that. That's kind of the debate here.
I mean, that's a conservative bill. I mean,
it is, absolutely. Yeah.
Especially with a Democratic governor, this is all about limiting the government's ability in terms of spending. And how does it keep track with GDP or per capita growth? But so that you can't actually start to spend more based on their philosophy. And government is projecting, and revenue estimating, or government is projecting and bringing it. This is strictly a conservative bill, period.
It is.
It's hiding in plain sight.
And it's, you know, it's the kind of thing that maybe wouldn't come up if we had a Republican governor.
Yes, sure, for sure. Before we get to Ed, I wanted to ask him some things about the ballot in Baton Rouge. So that's the next thing that we have up. But before then, we mentioned that Amendment 5 has been getting a whole lot of attention, but we didn't say why. So I'm going to read it for you. Do you support an amendment to authorize local governments to enter into cooperative endeavor ad valorem tax exemption agreements with new or expanding manufacturing establishments for payments in lieu of taxes? I will let the person who was a city official and who needed property taxes to talk to us about that one, and that's Oliver. What would your response have been if you were on city council when this came up?
I'm actually a nay on this, because I think this is a whole other conservative piece, right? And it has less to do with New Orleans and overall taxes than it has to do with these individual parishes, especially now with this movement about a lot of these tax breaks and a lot of how would I say breaks that are given to whether it's the film industry, some of these plants, major manufacturers. I'm a no on this one, because what it's saying is you can bypass the state government and negotiate individually with businesses and cut your own deal. Period.
So I can give you, say, a year or 2 or 3 worth of or whatever, and you can just give me a break on my property taxes.
Bingo. We can phase you in. But Louisiana doesn't need phase-in money. Louisiana needs right now money. Phase-in is the reason why we're upside down right now, especially when you talk about critical services for people. So at some point, this is another one that's hiding in plain sight. So all this is saying is a lot of those little parishes out there, you want another Formosan plant to come in, even if it's over objection, you can give them a major tax breaks on the front end, and we'll come back and talk to you later. No, there needs to be an investment right now.
No, Oliver's absolutely right on this. I mean, this is just one more thing to preempt local government. I mean, we can't raise the minimum wage. We can't have conversations about paid sick leave. We can't, like now we're going to tell, municipalities that they can't have any say so about, big business coming into their communities, and then, and like we've seen with Sasol and so many other like tax breaks, it's like, so you get $1 billion tax credits for 14 permanent jobs. That's not okay. That is not okay. Like, that's not serving our communities. And I think that, and I'm sure, Ed can talk to this as we kind of get into Baton Rouge. We saw a fight play out in Baton Rouge, which is probably where this legislation came from, around Exxon and whether these tax dollars could actually go to, to schools and, and furthering and supporting public education. And so, I mean, I think that, there's certainly a debate there, but I just think that we've got to be really careful as citizens when we start seeing the preemption of local government, because the closer government is to you, the closer it impacts you. So your mayor, your city council is having a much more direct impact on your daily lived life than per se the governor on a daily basis. However, like I said, this 2020 is a special year, so I won't say that, I certainly haven't felt many layers of government this year and beyond, but but that at the end of the day, like your mayor having their hands tied to be able to make critical decisions about your economy that's existing in the sense of New Orleans, you're in the Gulf Coast region. You're in a regional economy. You're not just in the state of Louisiana economy, but you're competing regionally against multiple states in the Gulf Coast. If you're Shreveport, you're competing against places in Texas and other things. And so the fact that we tie our mayor's hands, and especially in places where they are trying to do the work of the people they represent, those things don't feel fair or feel right, and and then removes the citizen one more level away from being able to fight for what they think is right for the community that they live in.
But is this a preemption, or is it just giving local governments the option to do this? Do you all see it one way and others see it another?
It's one way, half a dozen another. So what about that mayor or that city official that doesn't want to phase it in, and the legislature, this is something that they want? I mean, how is the language there in terms of protecting the interests of the local government? Or is the legislature just saying, hey, look, what we're saying is now, in lieu of property taxes, that you can do phase in terms of revenue coming to the government. You can phase it in, or you can set up a payment deal with them when we need front end money.
I think there's a philosophical argument here too, that, you hear people complain, sometimes companies complain, and retention institutions complain that we have high tax rates in Louisiana, but we don't have a high tax burden necessarily because there are all these different ways you can negotiate your taxes away. And it leads to unequal taxation, it leads to unpredictability for business and for government. And it's not a level playing field, and it also doesn't, I think I lost my thought. It doesn't, you can't even advertise that you have lower tax rates. I mean, you don't even get the benefit of not having a high tax rate, which is telling the world, come to Louisiana, we don't have a high tax rate. So this kind of everybody cut their own deal culture that we have. I just think this is part of that.
Good point. Good point.
And not good for the state in general.
And I think it should also be worth mentioning, and people should perhaps look at this in conjunction with the homestead exemption amendment that also exists. Louisiana already has a very, very generous homestead exemption program, which means that those local jurisdictions are not getting the taxes that they otherwise would get. And so there are two things on the ballot, at least two, and maybe more I'm not looking at right now, that could possibly give local jurisdictions even less money. I wanted to go to Ed for a couple of reasons. Ashley gave us a near perfect segue to you about the big fight over Exxon in Baton Rouge and ad valorem taxes there. Can you just briefly explain how that all played out in East Baton Rouge Parish?
I am not the person that can explain it by any stretch of the imagination. I would turn that over to Stephanie to explain that part of it. That's a little bit out of my league right now.
Okay, Stephanie, do you remember?
Because a few minutes ago, my computer went completely out. I'm on another computer right now, but anyway.
All right. I'm glad you're still here, Ed.
All right.
So as I remember, and I think I can summarize it a little briefly, there's the industrial tax exemption program in Louisiana that has been overseen by a Board of Commerce for, I think, since the 1920s or 30s. And in a very strange setup, it has allowed an independent, non-elected board to decide if industries in Louisiana can be exempted from property taxes. Through 2016, that board could take a vote, and whatever they did was binding. That was just a law. So if they decided that Exxon and Baton Rouge wouldn't have to pay property taxes, then the East Baton Rouge School Board wouldn't have a single say in that decision or not. Governor John Bel Edwards signed an executive order in 2016 that gives the local's jurisdiction, whether it's the sheriff's office or the school board or the fire department, et cetera, the right to say, no, we actually want our taxes. We don't want you to not pay us our taxes. And so that was one of the ways that Exxon, I think St. Bernard Parish, actually stood up to industry there and were able to give all of their teachers a raise immediately after that. But Ed, let me ask you specifically, I'm looking at your Baton Rouge ballot, and it is one that looks incredibly long. You all have perhaps one of the bigger ballots in the state. Can you just kind of briefly describe like what's on your ballot there? I see, mayor, president, I see constables, I see judges. It seems like a really thick ballot. How are people talking about it there?
Well, let me tell you, we got the council races, we got the judges races, and what you have is a weird kind of thing going on. You have a group of young folk who are saying, we want young people in all the positions. There's a group out there that's just pushing for that. We want young people. It's our time. We have, and that's one of the cases in the district judges race. We have one person running for judge, and she is a judge right now, by the way, and Ms. Foxworth, and she unseated Yvette Alexander by 27 votes in the last election. Well, there's a group there saying, well, we want to go younger. Another group says in the middle saying, well, we want to stay where we are. So you got that. We got that dichotomy there. But then along the line, you just got council races all over the place. But here's what, I'm not gonna get into who's running and all that kind of stuff, but here's an interesting thing with COVID has caused that people don't talk about. In the inner city, in the mid city where most of these council members are coming from, there used to be, during election time, people would meet at churches, they would meet at schools, and they would do all these things in person where people would come in, there would be folk who come in who are middle of the road and just tell them, these are the people running for office, this is what they stand for. These people would come in and they would talk to these people, and you would have that all over East Baton Rouge Parish, and especially in the inner city. We don't have that. With COVID, you don't have that. So you have this strange races that are going on where people are basically going on, I know that person, I may vote for them, or somebody they've seen on Zoom or something like that. When before, the person would either be at their house, they would be at the churches, or they would be at community centers, and they would see all of these. But that's not happening now. And so what you have in Baton Rouge, those candidates who have the most money, and they'll say, well, that happens all the time, but not specifically like this. The candidates who have the most money, who can put those cards on the doors, and they can go around and talk to people, they can put the signs up, they can do all the electronic stuff, they're gonna get a lot of young folks. The older folk are sort of left in this situation where they're used to meeting and greeting and talking to folks. They don't know where they are because they don't do the Zoom, they don't do any of that kind of stuff. And so it's a weird way that this election is going to be held in Baton Rouge. That's how Baton Rouge in the inner city works, with meeting, greeting, seeing people face to face, learning what the issues are. And that's not the case here right now. In the mayor's race, that's just wide open. That's nuts. What I'm saying in the mayor's race, you have different groups that have decided, okay, I'm going to run and blah blah blah. It's hard to unseat a mayor in Baton Rouge. It's very hard to do that. But you got a wide array of people who are coming to do that, who are making that effort right now to try to unseat Mayor Broom. That's going to be a shootout. Now, the issues in Baton Rouge are not like some other areas. The issues in Baton Rouge right now is crime. That is the biggest issue in Baton Rouge. You could talk about all of the bike paths. You could talk about all these things that pretty up the city. But people are talking about crime now, and what are we doing with the police department? Where is it going to go? What's happening in our city? How we can protect ourselves? And the candidates who could better project at what they're going to do, that's who's going to get a lot of votes here. But that is a major issue in Baton Rouge, and I think the first time it's been like number one. That's the number one issue here. And with all these people running, even the people running for council, they have to explain how they're going to protect what they're going to do to protect their parts of Baton Rouge, and what do they have to say about putting a cap on this sort of thing. And so it's just Baton Rouge is just different from I think from anywhere else in the state right now.
Oliver mentioned earlier about Please Rise could be about the district attorney as much as it is about the judge. So you also have your district attorney, Hilla Moore, in East Baton Rouge on the ballot, and judge races. I'm guessing that has to be the issue that they're all talking about, since you mentioned crime being a predominant topic of discussion. What are the specific issues being talked about in regards to those races?
Well, as far as the district attorney's race, that's been, if you talk about that, I don't know anything about that. That's been quiet. I don't hear anything. But in the
he's going unchallenged.
He's unopposed. I see. My bad. I read that wrong.
Okay, he's a walk-in. He's there, and it's hard to beat a sitting district attorney anyway. That's very hard to do. But these races, the meat and potato races in East Baton Rouge Parish, as I said before, are the council member races, and the different council members are all talking about, well, I'm going to do this with the police department. I'm going to have people that I want people to live in this, a police officer to live in the city. I think that'll be a good thing. That's what folk are saying. And that sort of riled up some police officers, because a lot of Baton Rouge police officers don't live in East Baton Rouge Parish at all. And that's a major issue with some of the council members. And they're trying to bring that up as that's something that they want to do. But they're talking about police, community policing, and that's even part of what the judges are talking about, even though they had nothing to do with their race. That's some of the conversations that they're having. But like I said, that judges race is interesting because most of the conversation are, how old are you, how young are you, how much experience you got, as opposed to how much, do you have too much? It's just, you kind of wonder where people are thinking in that particular race. But the council races are the meat and potatoes, and that's basically it. How are we going to reform what we're doing in Baton Rouge? How are we going to stop people from being shot? What you going to do to stop people in the neighborhoods from killing people? And that is huge here in Baton Rouge. We've already exceeded last year's homicide numbers. So that's front and center, and that's and people not talking about a whole lot of other stuff. As far as you talk about how we're going to improve the city and roads and all that kind of stuff, that's happening a little bit in the mayor's race, but in the council races, I mean, it's just how you going to keep us safe, and each council member has to answer that.
Ashley, I know your organization works across the state, and so you would have had contact with people in Shreveport and Caddo Parish. There is a DA's race there. There is also Public Service Commission race, and also U.S. Senate candidate out of Shreveport. What are people saying there about the is the importance of these races well understood and being talked about? And what are voters there talking about? And is there more information that they need? And perhaps somebody's watching from Shreveport today and wants to know a little bit more about what's on their ballot and why they should care.
Yeah, my organizer Candace Baptiste in Shreveport, she's watching. She's watching today. But we've been doing a lot of work. Even in Baton Rouge, I always tease. I'm a Baton Rouge girl through and through, and I think Ed's analysis is right. And what also offer, one of the things that we've been trying to do, we've been doing virtual Zoom forums, both for mayoral and candidates in Baton Rouge. We just had a judicial forum in Shreveport just yesterday via Zoom, where all of the candidates were present. And so we're just trying to create as many spaces as we can to help people connect. And then also too, creating these explainers about what people's roles are. What do they actually have the power to do? Because a lot of people don't know, before Oliver kind of laid it out about what why a magistrate judge matters or whatever, folks aren't, if you're not ever interacting with the court system, or it's, cousin, brother, whatever, you don't know why these judges matter. And I think that we've spent a lot of time trying to explain that. I know the DA's race, both in Shreveport, New Iberia, New Orleans, are kind of huge pieces where we've had a lot of community, coming to the forefront, saying that we need to have a discussion about the DA. We've talked a lot about judges on the call so far. We talk about this judicial discretion, they actually have the discretion to give people their lives back. And and for us, I think that one of the things that's been energizing around the state is that people have felt kind of stuck or trapped, like they couldn't do anything about criminal justice in this state. We've watched some of the reforms that have happened around criminal justice at the state level. That's felt good. I think that had a lot to do with some of the outcomes in 2019 statewide races. And so I think that these DA's races in these communities across the state, I think are giving folks an opportunity to say, wait a minute, this actually matters. And when we see these headlines around fake subpoenas and, and all of the injustices that, and headlines that I could name, but won't go into, we've all at times felt helpless. What can I do? These races that are on this ballot in November 3rd, this is your chance to elect a district attorney that is going to prioritize Black and brown lives, that's going to allow people to walk in their full human dignity, and that's going to use their discretion to give people's lives back and not be an adversary. We've been doing hard on crime since before I was born, and I don't see the results. I don't see the numbers. I don't see the you know, like, so I don't understand why, you know, I think people are starting to be open to, like, there has to be a better way. There has to be some lessons learned around how do we, where say, you know, public safety and criminal justice meet, and what are all those things in the middle, whether it be mental health or after school programs or any number of other interventions that we know actually could stop stop our numbers from being so high, you know, in terms of incarceration. And so, I mean, I think that we've got a lot of energy. We had over 200 folks on the Judicial Forum yesterday. We did on Tuesday, we did one with Alliance for Affordable Energy with the Public Service Commission members. You know, folks are also savvy, like they understand. I mean, you know, we can, you know, you want to have a long conversation with somebody that's really mad. Well, you talk to somebody in the East about this, about that's being built in their community that they're paying for, that may not benefit them in the long run, right? And so I think that folks are getting smart about these offices. They're starting to understand, like, you know, where the power is and who has the power to, you know, give them their, you know, allow them to have a voice and not feel like they're being steamrolled by, you know, by energy companies. And so I think at the end of the day, folks are starting to get savvy and they're waking up. And I mean, I think for most of those Zoom forums, we've been seeing a lot. The other thing that's happened that I think has also been helpful to us is that this humanitarian crisis that we're in following the pandemic. I mean, we're at Shiloh Baptist Church in Baton Rouge every Monday. I mean, they're seeing over 500 people every single Monday to get food because of, you know, displaced folks from Lara that are living with family members here, folks that are being impacted by joblessness. And so at the end of the day, like, we've been using those spaces to be able to talk to people about, you know, voting is a social determinant of health. These folks are deciding your quality of life, and we need you to get involved and get engaged and make sure your voice is heard. And, you know, so that, again, if we want things to change, they can't change if it's just a couple of us voting. We need everybody to vote and say what matters to them.
I wanted to ask you, we're going to get into a deeper conversation about DAs in a second, but I know that in Shreveport and in the New Orleans area, there's the Public Service Commission on the ballot. And that may be yet another race that people don't know exactly what the public service commissioners do and why it matters. Is that Oliver I hear speaking?
The what?
Public.
Who?
Well, Oliver,
I think you just volunteered, Oliver. Should I take
yes,
this
I think
one?
you did.
Yes.
Those people that regulate our high energy and utility bills. Oh yeah. Another best kept secret, right? If you know who your public service commissioner is, say yay. Yeah, I mean, Lambert Bossier Jr. is ours. He's not up. I think it's Scrimmetta and Alan Bourne and
yeah, and a few others. Alan Bourne is the Democrat. Yeah,
and a few others.
Kevin Pearson, who was in the legislature.
You know, one of the differences, of course, Stephanie, you know, and Jarvis knows that the New Orleans City Council is the regulatory authority for energy and utilities within the city. But the Public Service Commission plays an extremely important role, especially when you talk about rates and systems, you know, and technology and what they do. And they've done a really, really good job, the Public Service Commission, of making sure that people don't know what the hell they do.
I was wondering where you were going with they've done a really good job, but go ahead.
I know.
So it's one of the great examples of how the power companies and utility companies control an entire branch of government. You know, so I would hope at some point we would begin to elect commissioners that were pro people in their bills rather than pro utility companies.
And so basically, they help regulate the utility company, not just energy, Joe, right? I mean, not just electricity.
You got Energy Louisiana, you have the City Council, you got the Public Service Commission. So for the rest of the state, they really need to be concerned about this.
Right. And we should just say in the New Orleans area, there's like, this district includes a small portion of New Orleans and Jefferson, East Jefferson, the North Shore. It's kind of like the Steve Scalise congressional district.
That's right. So those people in that little area, Stephanie, need to be concerned.
Yeah.
And you should always be concerned about the things that are on your ballot. As Dr. Lee said at the beginning, there are some people who just check out, well, I don't know that, or I don't know who that is. I don't know what this office does. I don't know what this amendment is, what this amendment will do. That's one of the reasons we're here tonight, is to help you provide some clarity. Obviously, it's a very, very long ballot, and everybody won't have the same ballot, so we can't get to every individual item on everybody's ballot, but we can kind of give you a rough overview of things. We've kind of saved this for last, I guess, or near last, and that is district attorney. As Ashley alluded to just a minute ago, there has been a lot of activism across the country, a lot of anger across the country, a lot of confusion, and not just this year, but I would say probably over the last going on 10 years now. In just about every place that has had some really major, I will lump them in as Black Lives Matter incidents, there has been a real push for those activists to change the district attorney. We saw it happen in Cleveland, Ohio, where Cuyahoga County elected a new district attorney after the Tamir Rice killing. Cook County in Illinois elected a new district attorney after, I think that was the Laquan McDonald case. And Ed has said that it's really, really hard to defeat an incumbent attorney. And the thinking used to be that it was not just hard, but impossible. And that if you were, and in New Orleans included, if you were elected district attorney, you never had to worry about being out of office again. Times have changed somewhat, and now there are a lot more people expressing interest in the district attorney's offices across the country. That includes Louisiana. And we have several races across the state where district attorneys are on the ballot. Some of them unopposed, as we said earlier about Baton Rouge, but New Orleans has a really competitive race for the next district attorneys, for the next district attorney after Leon Canizero has decided not to run for re-election. So I wanted to just open it up to Oliver and Stephanie to talk a little bit about why the DA is as important as the DA is.
Let me, Steph, I'll just throw some things out there. Take subpoenas.
Locking up domestic violence victims.
No, hey, locking up witnesses.
Locking up, yeah.
Yes.
Right?
Subpoenas.
Double and triple billing for candy bar theft. Holding someone for 3 to 4 years before charges are even brought before them. How do you continue this whole movement around criminal justice reform and saving
Trying juveniles as adults?
Millions of dollars. So, there's so much stuff. Look, for the people out there around the state, I'm not going to say forget about president, focus on the district attorney, especially if you've been involved in this whole criminal justice reform, trying to end this tough on crime movement that's bankrupt so many local communities, and really putting common sense back into criminal justice and fairness back in the process, that once it leaves the magistrate, and gets to the court. I think it's extremely important. We have 4 candidates right here in New Orleans that are extremely different. Extremely different. Very different agendas, very different platforms. Pick one that lines up with you and your family and that you think that promotes justice. But all around this state, I think if there's gonna be criminal justice reform, if there's gonna be common sense in terms of the criminal justice system, I think the DA is the most, and who's the DA, no matter what parish or county you're in, is gonna be one of the most important places we can start.
If you are curious about the power of the district attorney, I would remind you that in New Orleans, Leon Canizero was a judge and then an appellate judge, and then decided to run for DA. Most people seek the more powerful positions, right? You want to go up the scale of influence and power and not down. And so after being a judge and after being an appellate judge, his next his next election was for district attorney. So I think that should give you at least a glimpse into what type of power he thought that he would have if he held that position. Stephanie, you were going to say something.
Right, and did have.
Yeah.
You know, if he had run, he probably would have been the exception to the rule of district attorneys getting reelected because his poll numbers were terrible. And really, it is because he was one of these old school, lock 'em up, tough on crime district attorneys at a time when that's very much out of favor. And it's interesting, it is connected, you know, Jarvis, you mentioned where we've had Black Lives Matter movements and I mean, all over the country, progressive DAs, Boston, Philadelphia. I think Philadelphia was kind of the leading one.
St. Louis.
Yeah, right, exactly. After, a number of incidents there, obviously, in that area. But it's also an issue, kind of this movement away from mass incarceration, this movement away from treating juveniles as adults, things, you know, putting people who've committed maybe nonviolent offenses in, you know, incarcerating them for a long time, is one that has kind of in an amazing way in this political environment crossed ideological lines. Because if you look at what happened at the state level, if you look at what's even happened at the federal level, I mean, Donald Trump signed a criminal justice bill that was actually pretty major. And it's interesting, he did it, it was kind of Jared Kushner, whose father went to jail, you know, kind of pushed it, and people like Kim Kardashian, you know, you could say, and obviously he's done all sorts of other things on the other side, but you really have support among some very conservative groups, evangelicals, libertarians who talk about the price of locking people up. So, you know, we almost have kind of an opportunity to do something that really can get a lot of momentum from a lot of people on this issue. And I think that's really exciting. And it, again, has potential for real change. There is going to be change from Leon Cannizzaro, no question. I mean, if he had run, it would have been status quo versus change. Everybody who's running is talking about some level of change. You could say that some are more credible than others. Some are saying, you know, for example, you know, difference would be you never charge a juvenile versus as an adult versus you reserve that for only the most, you know, extreme situation. You know, that's kind of the public debate as opposed to this old school, you know, multiple billing we talked about before, that's charging people, you know, double and triple billing them. If somebody, it's the third strike you're out philosophy, basically. So if somebody has a couple of offenses, but they're minor offenses, they're nonviolent offenses, this idea that once you hit 3, you know, lock them up, like that idea is really falling out of favor. And they're all talking about pulling way back on that, which is something that is used to send people away if they haven't, you know,
For a long time
for minor offenses. It's also something that's used in the plea bargaining process to basically, the threat of multiple billing somebody is something that's used to secure a plea. So it's really something that, as you know, Jarvis, you said, it is a source of power for a district attorney. And you have candidates now talking about giving up some of that power, saying, you know, that's not the way to go. That's not what's good for the community. So it's a very interesting conversation, I think.
So Stephanie, I'll quote a famous district attorney. If you want to know how important the DAs all over the state are, one of our famous district attorneys in dealing with non-unanimous juries of verdicts, right, said, yes, it's rooted in slavery. Yes, it comes from Jim Crow, but it's worked.
Who said that? I've heard that.
So if you ever thought the DA was important, this guy said, yes, it's rooted in slavery. Yes, it comes from Jim Crow, but it's worked for us. Dave,
who said that?
The guy in Southwest Louisiana.
That's right. Okay, I remember. Yeah.
And I would also say, as Stephanie was mentioning about plea bargaining, that is hidden from view, but it has disastrous consequences for people's lives. If you know that you didn't commit a crime, for example, but the district attorney is leaning on you to plead guilty because you'll get a shorter sentence or won't go to jail as long. There are many people who have, and the Innocence Project of New Orleans can tell you this, who have decided to plead guilty to something that they know they did not do because the district attorney was leaning on them for a plea. And so these are the types of things that the public does not generally see and may not even think about a whole lot. But those are things that you should ask your candidates who are running for district attorneys. How will you use plea bargaining? Are you going to use it as a big stick to get people into prison who you could not prove in court that they were guilty or not? Or are you going to use it to show some mercy to someone? Because those are totally different types of strategies that a district attorney can employ.
Right. And I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Steph.
I was just quickly on top of that, the power dynamic, you have the district attorney's office often going against somebody who's represented by a public defender who has so many cases, who just doesn't have the bandwidth to focus on each case as much as that defendant needs them. You know, they do amazing work, but it's just the resources are so disproportionate. So I'm sorry. So that's another kind of imbalance of power.
Yeah, for sure.
Sure.
Go on, Ashley.
Just to add to that, Stephanie, I mean, I think one of the things that, you know, I think, you know, is really critical. I mean, not just in New Orleans, but I think it's been a more open conversation in a lot of our communities, is that folks are starting to understand like the role of the DA. And I think New Orleans probably more than anywhere else in the state. I mean, you know, Shreveport too, after
Shreveport. Yeah.
that 60 special that I still cannot get over, but get over his comments. But I think, you know, the reality is that, you know, there's just been, there've been so many headlines. I mean, and then we even saw where not only was Canzero polling badly, but even his endorsement could tank your campaign. I mean, he was toxic at one point. And I think that, you know, also too, Vote has, you know, the voice of the experience, you know, Vote is reenfranchised, you know, over 30,000 folks that are formerly incarcerated with their right to vote. You know, folks, this is personal for folks. And I think that we're going to continue to see, you know, we're going to see folks come out for this race because a lot of folks have felt helpless, right? Like that they couldn't do anything about what's been happening around criminal justice in our cities. And I think that they are really clear that this is their opportunity, like I said, to like really center, you know, folks being able to walk in their full human dignity, and also to look at the data that says, well, we've been doing it this way for a really long time, this hard on crime. What has it netted us? How is our state any better? And, you know, and trapping our citizens in this never ending cycle of, you know, criminalization and poverty, this is not, you know, it's not good for business. More importantly, it's not good for our people. And it's why we stay at the top of the bad list and at the bottom of the good list. And I think that this is a moment where more people are aware than they've ever been about the role of the district attorney and holding them accountable. And so, you know, the race, you know, like, so whether it's, you know, the sheriff in South and West Louisiana, who also said when we were doing, you know, when Vote was doing Justice Reinvestment initiative, that we were letting all the good ones go. I was like, are you like, I mean, you know, like this is some serious stuff that's, you know, like there's some serious issues when, you know, we aren't allowing people to walk in their full human dignity, and we're not willing to, you know, really address the fact that the system is broken. And so I think that folks are kind of fed up, and I think to Ed's point about, you know, folks really worrying about crime, but also trying to figure out what's that balance between public safety and, you know, and criminal justice, and really thinking about like all of the interventions in the middle that actually is where we need to be putting time and money, instead of, you know, like Stephanie mentioned, like, you know, like just, you know, ruining people's lives while they're waiting in jail to be, you know, to go for their day in court. That may not happen for months, years. And, you know, and it's just not fair. That's not how the system was supposed, you know, well, maybe that is how the system was supposed to work, but it certainly isn't what's written down in statute. Okay. But yeah.
We have about 15 minutes left. So I wanted to start, and I'll ask each of you these questions or some variation of it, but I'll start with Ed. What do you think the voter turnout is going to be like in East Baton Rouge Parish? You know, how excited do you feel that people there are to vote? And are they fully informed about what they're going to vote for and why?
I'll give you a couple things here. the voter turnout, I think, is going to be huge. And it's because of, and I'll give you initials, DT. Everything else is over here. It's over here. The race for president is just going to ginny up the numbers. And I'm talking about all over the parish, from Central to Zachary to Baton Rouge, Village St. George, our new city. And there's people going to come out. I expect to see an enormous percentage of African American vote because of the Donald Trump thing. And that's going to make it interesting in all of these council races that we have in the majority Black district, because you're going to have all these people coming out and they're voting for whomever. And so before, in some of those council races, there may have been a lukewarm interest, but it's going to be a lot now, because these people now are going to be voting for people on the council, where before, okay, I may go, I may not, but they're going to be in the polling place, and so they're going to pull the lever for somebody. So that's going to be interesting. The mayor's race, if you wanted something huge, the mayor's race would be big by itself. But now you got this added thing with the presidential race. And I just think Baton Rouge is going to go out of its way to be big. There's been a lot of folk in the background who have been pushing people to get out and vote. Yours truly. And you go to almost any church, and they're saying, get out and vote. Now, are they telling you who to vote? Yeah, I don't know. But you have a lot of folk who are saying, get out there, and how important it is. And so I just think the percentages in Baton Rouge it may hit a record, I think, this time, because the number of young people voting is just going to be incredible. When I'm talking about the 21 to 35 age group, I think that number is going to be just off the chart this time, as opposed to any other races. I think they were big during Obama's race. They were there, but it's going to be bigger now, I think, in this race, because you have more people who are educated about this, and more people who are angry, and more people who are excited, angry and excited, and they're going to get out there and vote. So I'm excited to see what the numbers are going to look like. But don't be fooled. It's like that in every community, not just African American community. It's like that all over the place. This is going to be huge in East Baton Rouge Parish, and like I said, I'm just excited to see it. The one thing, the judges' race, there was a poor turnout where you had 27 votes separated. That's not going to happen this time. Somebody's going to win by a lot. One of those two in the judges' race is going to win by a lot this time. So I'm excited about Baton Rouge and the number of people. And I hope the folks that are coming out really understand who they voted for and why they voted in the council races and all of that. And the COVID thing has made things different as far as educating people on the people they're voting for. So they're going to be out there to vote.
Well, let me go to Stephanie, and then Oliver, and then Ashley after that.
I agree. It's going to be huge everywhere. We're already seeing that in states that have started early voting. I mean, we all saw the pictures from Georgia of people who, showed up at dawn and they were still there at dusk, and they were determined, and they shouldn't have to be that determined, but thank goodness they are. And it's, it's the reality show. We're all part of it. We've all been part of it for 4 years. Everybody has strong feelings about it. You wake up every day and you're already behind on all the news. It is all encompassing. And so people feel very, very strongly. One of the things that's so interesting in the polls to me in the presidential race is both in terms of presidential preference and like approval, disapproval, that question. It's usually, do you strongly approve, strongly disapprove, somewhat approve, somewhat disapprove? Everybody's strongly in one direction or the other. Everybody feels really strongly however they feel. And I think that's going to be reflected in the turnout. what that means for lower ballot races, I mean, it's tough because you're going to get a lot of people voting who have not studied and do not have the bandwidth or interest or whatever in really doing exactly what we're doing tonight, which is talk about what these offices mean and what these ballot questions mean and why they're important. So I don't know what's going to happen. You know, it's an opportunity, but I also fear that we'll have a lot of voting from, you know, from people who are not that engaged on other things. But I hope people do the work. Unfortunately, it does take work. And again, as Ed said, it takes more work this year because of COVID, because you're not going to run into the candidate out into the community. Your neighborhood association isn't having a live forum. Every election year, I always host a couple forums. I haven't done any this year because they're not having them. Some places they are having them. It's interesting. Some, I think the North, like St. Tammany, they're having live forums. New Orleans, they're not. So that tells you something about the politics of the moment, I think. But it's, you know, it's, so again, it's incumbent on people to do the work. I think I think so many people understand the importance of voting and are getting the message that, you know, A, some people don't want you to vote. So you defy them, show them that you're going to vote, and B, you're going to have to, if you are on the side that wants to vote Donald Trump out, it needs to be overwhelming. It needs to not be a close call because of all of this talk of challenging the election. So that message has totally gotten through, I think. I hope the message of your vote on all of these issues also gets through because, again, like you said, it's all really important in ways that, you know, that affect our daily lives. So,
are you all hearing much attention or feedback to the U.S. Senate race?
Not so much. I think this is not on any list of races that are in play nationally, and it's interesting because a number of Republican seats that you wouldn't have expected at the beginning of the cycle are in play. Places like Iowa, even South Carolina is crazy, Georgia, but you know, it's a possibility. It's Bill Cassidy, it's interesting, his campaign, when you watch his ads, he's not talking about Donald Trump. He's talking about healthcare. He's talking about some very bread and butter issues, which is kind of a strategy if you don't want to alienate people. But it's, I think there's a lot of Democratic enthusiasm in general. So, you know, if you want to vote Donald Trump out, you are all in on the Democrats. Is it enough to make it a competitive race? I don't know. We do have this strange runoff situation where there are a whole bunch of candidates on the ballot. If Bill Cassidy doesn't get above 50% in November, there will be a runoff in December. So it's almost like if he doesn't meet that threshold, then we've got a race.
Correct. And if Republicans are trying to control the Senate or hang on to the Senate, then you can expect a whole lot of money and attention and ads.
Be race. Yes.
In Louisiana, we're not used to having national attention for elections in Louisiana. Oliver, what are you hearing about people's enthusiasm and level of information?
The most important election of our time. I think sanity, justice, sober, all of those things are on the ballot. I'm asking people to start at the bottom of the ballot and vote up. Personally, I'm saying, hey, look, go to the bottom and then vote your way up. Because in many cases, the bottom of the ballot is the one that's going to affect your life. I was in a conversation with someone today, and they went out of their way to tell me, hey, man, I'm going to stand in line all day to vote if it takes me standing in line all day. The Senate race has been kind of quiet. I don't know that Adrian Perkins has had enough money to get into a fight or to kind of pick at Cassidy, or I think some things could have happened there. I don't think he ever got the resources to make it happen. But those DA's races, those amendments, those judicial races on the ballot are going to say a lot about the criminal justice reform movement, sentencing reform, what we did with non-unanimous juries, being smart and constitutional on crime. If people actually take an interest and vote in those races, I think it's going to set a tone for criminal justice moving forward. Yes, the presidential election is important. Those congressional elections are important. But, I like, when I talk about DC, I say that it's so far away from us now, we need a passport to get there any damn way. So, I'm hoping that people focus on down ballot, start there, and work their way up. And on behalf of Equity Media and WBOK and the Good Morning Show, man, I want to thank Nicole and Judy Reese Morris for this very important question to everybody who's online around the state. We're all one for justice, guys. We're all in this together, and we all need to vote.
Ashley, you probably, like I said, travel more across the state than the other people here. Are there different pockets of enthusiasm across the state, or are people just generally excited and raring to go about early voting, which starts 2 days from now?
Yep, 16th through the 27th. And, and I think that's, I think there's excitement. I mean, I think, one of the things we're excited about was that we were able to win 3 additional days of early voting, and that we were able to ensure that voters would have the COVID reasons stand for reasons to request an absentee ballot. And I think it's those things where you see people fighting for your right to vote, fighting for those pathways. I think that's exciting. A lot of people forget that Louisiana proportionally has the second largest Black population in the country, second to Georgia. And so one of the things that I think that that if we have unprecedented Black voter turnout, that it does change things. I mean, there's a reason Bill Cassidy's running ads. There's a reason, there's a reason some of these things are are starting to happen. And so I do think that there's enthusiasm. I think that, folks are, kind of sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I think that you're going to see that in voter turnout. I mean, I think that we've already seen, just in terms of absentee ballot turn-in and other things, like the numbers are already astronomical, and so much more than what they've ever been in the past. And even when we saw the state, like comparing it to statewide, statewide 2019 last year, I mean, we had unprecedented Black voter turnout again then. And so I do think that there's energy. I do think that folks are going to make their way down the ballot. I think these DA's races are very personal to folks. We've got over 100 canvassers across the state leaving door hangers. We got folks text messaging and phone banking, voters across the state to keep them engaged and give them access to as much information as possible. I think my team's been dropping our hotline and our website, different resources in the chat. And so also too, we've got printables. And so, call that hotline. I'll drop my email in the chat as well. We're happy to bring ballots to churches, community groups around the state. And I would be remiss if I didn't lift up our partner Vote, who has been leading the way and really holding this campaign. All across the state. They've got organizers in Baton Rouge, New Orleans, Jefferson, Lafayette, Shreveport, along with our team in other parts of the state. And so our idea was to have that through line so that we would understand where everybody was and actually have have organizers on the ground that are of that place, talking to their folks, educating their folks. We've seen voter registration also through the roof, higher than it's ever been in my experience of doing voter registration over the years. And so there's just been a lot of energy. And so I feel good. I feel, I feel like folks are excited and, and just ready for change. And I think that, and that's on both sides, but I do think that we'll see unprecedented turnout for this election, which is why we're telling folks to early vote. Treat every day of early voting like election day, because we're trying to make sure that folks have the safest pathways to their vote. And so early voting is a good option. If you're worried about lines, if you've got a lot of people that, end up ultimately at your polling location, take advantage of early voting. And then also check on the Secretary of State's website, because some of the early voting locations have changed in some cities across the state.
And thank you for the person in the chat who corrected me that early voting actually begins tomorrow. I do not want to personally be accused of voter suppression, so let me correct that for the record.
Right.
For the record.
And expanded hours too. So
yes.
Look, yeah, just
what are the
check
hours?
Ashley, is it 8 a.m. to 7 p.m.?
Yes, it's 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. except for Sundays. So
Yes.
yes, so the 6th through the 27th. And then election day is November 3rd from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. And so, and I also, you know, like Oliver, would like to also thank Judy and Nicole and the Urban League for giving us this space. You know, this has been a lot of fun, and I appreciate working with all of you, but it's been so nice to kind of work with you in different ways. And so this has been a great panel.
Okay, let me make sure we got this right before we go. Someone from your organization actually seems to be saying it's from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. for early voting. 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. for early voting, 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. on election day.
Okay, well, thanks, Kat, for correcting me.
Yes.
So again, we want to maximize the vote. And also we should say, you have a few more hours to complete the census if you have not done that.
Yes.
You have until midnight Hawaiian time, so that gives you a little past 4 o'clock in Louisiana time. So please do that if you haven't done that already. Hey guys, this is a very long. I'm sorry.
I said it's critical for us to get our fair share of federal dollars, and as a poor state, we need them. Take the census.
Mm-hmm.
And Louisiana is, sad to say, in last place for census participation. There may be a lot of excuses for that. We had, 2 hurricanes to come during the census counting operation, but still every other state is at least 99% participation. We are 98.5 or somewhere around that. So do it for yourself and do it for state pride. Let's get ourselves counted over these last few hours. And
again, do it because they don't want you to.
Exactly. That's always a good reason to do it. Do it out of spite, if not out of civic responsibility. So I want to turn it back over now to Judy, and I want to first thank her for allowing me to do this and for assembling this great panel. We thank all of you all who participated and asked questions. We hope that you will go out and vote and take a person to go vote with you. Make sure that people around you have their election plans in place, and to go be a full civic participant. Don't let this vote pass you by. A lot of people have given a whole lot for us to have this opportunity, and I think exercising our franchise is a way of showing gratitude.
Good job, Jarvis. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Jarvis. That was great.
Yeah, good job, man.
Thank you so much, everybody. I think we're having a little challenge with bringing my camera back up, but this has been an incredible night. Just everything that we hoped that it would be. All of you are brilliant experts in your field. Thank you for sharing this important information. This is exactly what we wanted. We wanted people to get information on everything on the ballot. I love what Oliver said about starting at the bottom of the ballot and working your way up. Outstanding moderation by Mr. Jarvis, DeBerry, all of you, just spectacular. Thank you, Silas Lee, who had to leave, Ed Pratt for helping us understand what's happening in Baton Rouge. We did have people participating from other parts of the state. So to Ashley Shelton for bringing her statewide lens and expertise to this conversation. OT, you always do it and do it at such an excellent level. Thank you. Just an incredible conversation we had. A lot of information, lots of people who have said, is this going to be available? I'll say one more time, it is going to be available on the Urban League's website tomorrow. You can listen to it and share it. If you learned anything today, please take that information and share it with someone that you know, and talk to everybody in your network. Everybody in your network. There are a lot of people who are not going to join a Zoom webinar to get their information, but they will listen to you. They trust you and they trust your opinion. So use your power with your network as well and get people engaged and get them voting. And again, we've done a lot of work with the census since 2019. So yes, in these last hours, please, if you haven't completed your census form, please do so and check in with folks in your network. Give them that one last push and that reminder. Thanks again to all of the Urban League board members who participated and attended this evening. Couldn't do any of this without you and without your support. And of course to Urban League senior team and staff, all who are watching and listening tonight. Thank you so much to Nicole Jolly, who produces our seminars. Thanks to everybody. Thanks to all who participated. And wake up, go vote, get out and vote. See you at the polls. Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening.
You too.
Right.
Bye-bye.